I'll just proceed. Okay, Gary James, Tribal Fisheries Program Manager. Been here a long time, 39 years, I think. So seen a lot. We've accomplished a lot, but boy, we got a lot more, long ways to go. This presentation today, I'm going to cover briefly our mission and goals and a little bit on our program. And then it's important to understand the general status of Columbia River salmon. You know, if we got climate change coming, we've already been dealt a difficult hand. So a little summary there. A tie to River Vision, First Food River Vision, our projects are. I'll summarize that, and then a little bit of detail on some aspects of the program in fish passage, flow, enhancement, floodplain restoration, and hatchery actions. Our mission statement is to protect, restore, and enhance the first foods that Colleen spoke of, and do that utilizing traditional ecological and cultural knowledge and science to inform population and habitat management, and also policy and regulatory mechanisms. So the fisheries program mission is to provide sustainable harvest opportunities, exercise that treaty right for fisheries by conserving and restoring the fish populations in their habitats. So we have different branches of the fisheries program. Habitat, we seek to protect and restore. Artificial propagation, we use a hatchery tool to put fish back or to supplement and enhance them. There's research and monitoring to evaluate how well all these programs are working. And again, ultimately, we're shooting for harvest, augmenting harvest as per our mission. So you look at the serving order of the first foods, and that's the basis for our program. Eric has authored some good papers on first food and river vision, which is the basis of the DNR mission statements and our direction for our projects. So the fisheries program deals obviously with water and salmon, the first foods. And Eric published a paper on river vision with several other authors, and it describes what a healthy, ecologically functioning floodplain looks like and should be. And there's some different, call them categories of health: hydrology, geomorphology, connectivity, riparian, and then the biota. And so those are aspects that we recognize in planning, implementing, and monitoring all of our projects. And again, we're doing this to seek that mission of providing more first foods, fish, to tribal use. So a little bit on the fisheries program. Our projects cover all of Northeast Oregon, Southeast Washington, a lot of sub-basins, headquarters here in Mission. We have field offices in the John Day, Grand Ronde, and Walwall basins. Our staffing started low. We're up to about 70 staff, about 30 projects, 20 million a year, and a little over half the staff is tribal members. I think it's important to understand a little bit the overall status of Columbia Basin salmon. The basin's been developed a lot. There's over 1,000 dams in the basin, 13 main stem Columbia and snake dams, and only 55% of the once available habitat's there today. And then about 65% of that habitat is in the form of reservoirs and pools, you know, dammed reservoirs. And then you get to the tributaries, and there's excessive channelization and floodplain development, which has really impacted our water quality and quantity and the complexity of the fish habitat. So you look at a map of the Columbia, and this gray area is where fish never were. The Columbia Basin is huge, goes to Canada, Montana, branches into Wyoming. So the gray areas were always blocked. But these pink salmon-colored areas were rendered inaccessible by man due to some of these dams. So that's a lot of area no longer accessible. And so the yellow and green is accessible, but the slashed areas, those are areas where fish remaining are listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened or endangered, which is pretty much everywhere else. An encouraging thing, this green zone here above La Grande is the Umatilla and Walwall Basin, where the accessibility has been reestablished. And it's the tribe's programs that's been behind the reintroductions there I'll talk about a little bit. So when you look at fish, they have a complicated life history. They go to the ocean and back. Salmon, lamprey, and sturgeon all do it. And so we've got to be cognizant of tributary habitat conditions where the adults spawn and the juveniles begin to rear, and they move downstream in the Columbia and to the estuary and the ocean, then come all the way back. So in the context of climate change, boy, the potential impacts are huge across all that broad geographic area. And so salmon and these anadromous fish go to the ocean and back are particularly very sensitive to water quality and quantity and quality changes that could be highly influenced by climate change. So what's happened in these Columbia tributaries? There's been a major loss in the habitat quality and quantity, and a lot of times two spawners don't even replace themselves, and when that happens, your populations go backwards, and 23 populations in the Columbia have become extinct, and 176 are ESA listed. That's a lot. It's estimated there used to be 15 million or so salmon in the Columbia. We're down to about a tenth of that now, and about 80% of that number is hatchery fish. So I covered all that to point out that we've got a difficult situation already prior to this potential climate change impacts. But our large program is trying to address and build back the habitat in some of these fish populations as per our mission statement. So this map shows in this area of activity that the tribe projects encompass in Northeast Oregon, Southeast Washington. The green triangles are habitat projects. The largest part of our program is this floodplain restoration. And we have those all over the place. Flow and passage projects concentrate more in the lower Umatilla and Walla Walla, where there's extensive agriculture. Hatchery projects that, are located in Umatilla, Walla, Grand Ronde to try to supplement the populations that are depressed. And there's lamprey and mussel projects. You'll hear about those more later. And then there's monitoring and evaluation, RM&E, of all these actions in all those locations. And a lot of basins, we have all these actions going on at the same time, like Umatilla and Walla Walla have been heavily developed from headwaters to the mouth. So we've got passage and flow and floodplain and hatcheries, and we're monitoring and evaluating, hopefully to head for that harvest goal. So you look back to our River Vision, our First Foods River Vision mission, and all these categories of fisheries project activities tie right back to some of those, one or several of those River Vision touchstones. So it's not just a mission, we're really applying it and understanding the habitat and the fish needs. So I'll give an overview in these categories of projects that aren't covered by the others coming up: fish passage, flow, floodplain restoration, and hatchery operations. So to start with passage, this is a map of the Umatilla, and it just shows a gauntlet of irrigation diversions in the lower basin. The Walla Walla is the same way. So 20, 30 years ago when this program started, all the facilities, ladders and screens, they were lacking or very insufficient to protect fish. And the tribe has implemented fixes, sponsored mainly through Bonneville Power funding. 20 projects, fish ladder and screen projects to improve passage in the lower Umatilla and Walla Walla. And then another aspect of passage is 12 barriers, dams, culvert, road crossings. There's some pictures, examples of some of those. So what's the relationship of these passage projects to climate adaptation? Well, obviously, there's going to be increased juvenile adult fish survival from these improvements, and very notable increase in the habitat availability or accessibility. And that will hopefully counter the anticipated impact of climate change, which might reduce the available habitat. So here's an action that's ongoing to expand available habitat access. So on to flow enhancement. In the Umatilla Basin, in the 90s, the Umatilla Basin project was implemented. It was a project which pumped Columbia River water to irrigators in exchange for leaving the Umatilla River water in channel. And a map here showing the Umatilla River real quick. This bold blue line shows a river with water in it, but the water used to be pulled out to fill Cold Springs Reservoir, and at Westland, It's pulled out, and these dashed lines represent an intermittent or dewatered river. Down here in this lower left picture shows the main stem Umatilla, and then between these trees is actually the river channel that's entirely dry. All the water's going down Westland Canal here. So water would have return flows back to the channel. We'd get a river, and then the next irrigation diversion, there it goes again. We have an intermittent river. Down to the mouth, same thing. So it was just a back and forth river. So this is a post-project example. The red shows water being pumped from the Columbia to these various irrigation districts and Cold Springs Reservoir. So now we have a bold line, continuous water, and it also freed 50 miles up, half of Mackay storage. So we have about 30,000 acre feet of water to release for critical fish, rearing and passage periods. In the Walla Walla, we're planning something similar. We're not there yet, but there has been some initial improvements of flows. This is just below Milton Freewater. The river was traditionally dry in the summer, but there's been some actions to at least get some flows. That's not all that we need, but again, we're working on it. So the flow project relationships, obviously more flow will increase the habitat quality and quantity, increase the survival, and the anticipated impacts of climate is going to be maybe less flow during critical times and worsen quality as far as temperatures. So hopefully that will buffer those anticipated fisheries climate-caused impacts. So on to watershed habitat restoration. Different activities, there's major land acquisitions and floodplain channel improvements working both in-stream and riparian. And this is just an example of a project here. I'll get into more detail. Our land acquisition, we try to acquire strongholds for protection and enhancement. Looking glass examples on the lower left is Grand Ronde, and then lower right is South Fork Touchy rainwater area. So 5 acquisitions have been done so far, 4,000 acres Grand Ronde and 160 in the Umatilla, and a lot more additional planning's ongoing. So another important aspect of floodplain restoration, we do comprehensive assessments, and we look at a river vision based assessment, assessing the health of those touchstones or those categories, and we define the limiting factors of what's wrong and conceptually define what needs to be done to address those to again provide a self-sustaining, ecologically functioning floodplain with multiple benefits. And most of our floodplains have been channelized through the years. This picture, Upper Grand Ronde, shows a typical project that we're doing major floodplain restoration to put the channel back into the multiple broad channels where it used to be. We've got a lot of existing agreements with landowners. We've done habitat projects for years. We got a little over 100 agreements with landowners, covered 138 miles and 24,000 acres. But the bigger projects in the last 10 years, we've got another 86 miles of projects like this picture on the right with major floodplain restoration of restoring the channel back to connect to the floodplain. This shows a more natural meandering stream, the upper left, through a valley bottom. And because it meanders and has good interaction, surface groundwater, there's a high water table. Well, when it's developed and channelized, and probably 80% of our streams, the seeded area is channelized, and that channelization comes from ag practices or roads, railroads, urbanization, all those things. You get erosion, incisement, and the water table ends up being, 10, 15 feet below. That doesn't do much for fish or ag, really. So this shows a natural and then a channelized stream. So real quick, Meacham Creek, these red lines used to be pre-60s where Meacham Creek occupied the floodplain. Well, there was a big flood in the 60s, and the railroad thought they would, to protect their right-of-way, they put the channel over to the far west side of the channel and locked it in with levees and dikes. It went over here. So we looked at where the former channel used to be and put the stream back. Here's in this picture shows the stream locked in over there, and then We've been working on this project for about 10 years, and there's about 8+ miles now of completed project, returning the stream to the natural floodplain where it
Gary, you have about 5 minutes left.
5 minutes. Okay. Here's some more examples of Catherine Creek and the South Fork and the Walla Walla and Tucannon large wood placement. We have a native plant nursery to help jumpstart the riparian restoration with locally adapted plants. It's important to understand the connectivity between ground and surface water. Here's just an example. When you have a complex braided channel with islands, and here's the water going in at the top of an island, and it will go subsurface and cool and come out the lower end. And this can't happen when a stream is channelized without those complexities. So it's a real cooling mechanism. You may have seen Scott O'Daniel's example. He looked at the Umatilla River. This is the distance. And as he looked at temperatures, they went up and down and up and down. He wondered, what's going on here with the temperatures? Then he looked at the complexity of the channel. The complexity had to do with this meandering and a healthy floodplain. When you have a high health or high complexity, you have low temperatures. In the converse, you have a channelized stream and you immediately see some higher temperatures, a direct relationship there. So we're evaluating all these things. We have a project that looks at our treated channels versus our controlled channelized, and we're looking at the physical and biological changes, and so far we're seeing some good changes as far as temperatures and fish abundance and use of that habitat. I'm just showing some pictures. We have got our work cut out for us. This is the Grand Ronde Valley. On the right, it used to be meandered, now it's channelized. We lost 45 stream miles. That's just an extreme example. Here's some more pictures of floodplain development. There is so much more to do in our tributaries. It's a major limiting factor. So what's this going to do for us? Increase habitat quality and quantity, reduce the scour and erosion. It will increase that surface to groundwater exchange that I mentioned. It'll cool water. It'll help store it and slowly release it into the summer, and ultimately help the juvenile adult survival. And hopefully all that will buffer those negative impacts that are coming from climate change. So the last piece is hatchery operations. We operate 11 hatchery satellite facilities in the Umatilla, Walla, and Grand Ronde Basins. And those are for juvenile acclimation and release and adult holding and spawning. We release 3 million salmon average a year from all these facilities. And the new Walla Walla hatchery under construction right now is slated to release 500,000 salmon for salmon reintroduction in the Walla Walla Basin. So 4 of these programs have been reintroduction. We've reintroduced spring chinook, fall chinook, coho in the Umatilla and spring chinook in the Walla Walla, where they used to not be. Remember that map with the extinction areas? We're supplementing existing but depressed populations in the Umatilla steelhead and then spring chinook in the Grand Ronde. So our acclimation facilities are located high in the basins like the Umatilla, so we imprint them on the spawning habitat, so they return to the gravel. And so we got to maintain that habitat through these various actions. And so how does these projects relate to climate? Increased abundance of fish for natural production and harvest. Hopefully that will help counter any increased mortalities due to climate changes. Our monitoring evaluation program, Jeremiah is going to get into the Umatilla part of this, but we look comprehensively, fish in and out of all these subbasins to evaluate these projects I'm quickly covering. Our goal is harvest. The last 3 years, we've struggled with low returns, Columbia Basin wide, but before that, we were seeing a good trend of increasing tributary fisheries. Some opportunities in up to 9 locations or tributaries a year, and general increase in zone 6, but again, the last few years, we've been challenged there. So that's it, a real quick overview covering the flows, the passage, the floodplain, and hatchery improvements, all directed at improving the habitat and the populations to provide increased harvest of that first food.
That was incredible. Thank you. We're going to hold questions